Hey, y'all, we're out here today to say that George Floyd was a beautiful man and a strong man, and he deserved to live free, just like all black people and all native people and all people in Minneapolis deserve to live free, and we're not gonna accept murder by the Minneapolis Police Department any longer.
I want you to make a vow every time you say his name. A vow to keep fighting as hard as we have to, as long as we can, as long as we need to, until we have real justice. This is the time to fight harder and get more people out on the streets. George Floyd!
We need to keep this momentum going. We need to nourish the flames inside of our bellies and not let them flicker and not let them be destroyed or blown out. We can't afford to lose any single candle in this movement. So check in on everyone, check in on yourself, drink some damn water. And I'm trying to figure out how to navigate this. For one, I just want everyone here to take care of themselves and check in on the black people in their lives and the people that are gonna be on the front lines and the ones that are gonna be most affected by this. And just don't ask them for anything. Just do what you can to be as supportive as you can.
We're gonna keep each other safe, we're gonna de-escalate today, but we're gonna let people know that Northeast Minneapolis can no longer be a safe harbor for racists and people who defend the police. If you're with that today, make a lot of noise.
Eyes for it, peace and a place on this earth for me and mine for it. Work for it, strive for it, I'ma organize for it. Stay up in the night and in the morning I'ma rise for it. Heart for it, mind for it, ears for it, eyes for it. Peace and a place on this earth for me and mine for it.
Peace, welcome to the Money, Power, Land Solidarity Podcast. Today, we're going to look deeper into the dynamics of MPD terrorism, repression, and murder by going beyond the visible players and looking at some behind-the-scenes power brokers that uphold the status quo. On June 4th, we posted a flyer on the Money, Power, Land Solidarity Patreon page, inviting our local listeners to a Northeast Minneapolis vigil for George Floyd. At that June 5th vigil, we took direct action by marching to the home of Brian Rice, a founding partner in the law firm Rice, Michels, Walther, heavy hitter in DFL politics, and longtime legal representation and lobbyist for the Minneapolis Federation of Police, the police union at the core of reactionary MPD culture. When we were there, we called out the firm's work protecting killer cops, and we alerted residents in his affluent neighborhood that their neighbor was providing harbor and legal muscle for the murderous thugs of the MPD. We also called on the Minneapolis Park and Recreation Board to cancel its contract with Rice, Michels, and Walther. In the weeks since this action, we've seen some movement. Rice, Michels, and Walther have legally restructured the firm. Partner Jim Michels is no longer a member of the firm, and he has taken all law enforcement clients with him. Rice's firm has taken on the name Rice, Walther, and Mosley. This is a small victory for the many activists who over the years have attempted to call out Rice's powerful and lucrative position as legal counsel and lobbyist for the park board, tactician behind many local politicians and campaigns, while he's also providing legal and political cover for continued brutality at the MPD. While Rice's firm may have officially cut ties with the Federation, Rice is still a registered lobbyist for the Federation. It's still important to understand the role that he and his firm have played maintaining the dramatic racial disparities we see in Minnesota and the culture of police impunity that reigns in Minneapolis. We must also continue to shine light on Jim Michels, who will represent the Federation in the contested months ahead. Right now, let's learn some more about influential lawyer, lobbyist, and political operative Brian Rice and his law firm. Brian Rice is the son of former state representative James Rice, who represented North Minneapolis in the state legislature from 1970 until his death in 1996. Brian Rice grew up steeped in DFL politics and was working on local electoral campaigns from as young as 14 years old. The young Rice was noted for his talents and intelligence as a political operative. A portion of West River Parkway in North Minneapolis is now named for Brian Rice's father, Jim Rice. Brian Rice graduated magna cum laude with a major in English in 1979 from Notre Dame and from the U of M Law School in 1982. He entered the bar in Minnesota that same year. Rice specializes in government affairs, municipal law, public pension law, and labor law. Rice was a founding member of the former Rice, Michels, and Walther law firm that is now Rice, Walther, and Mosley. Rice, Michels, and Walther had been legal representation for the Federation at the contract bargaining table and in labor disputes through many episodes of murder and abuse. For example, they represented Jason Anderson, serial domestic assaulter who murdered Fong Lee, and they got him his job back through arbitration. They represented Bob Kroll in an episode of off-duty police violence against an Arterworld attendee. They represented officers Schwarzy and Ringenberg, who murdered Jamar Clark. They were representation for the officers' union while they were injecting people with ketamine without their consent and when thousands of rape kits were found uninvestigated. Rice is also a registered lobbyist for the Federation since 2012. Many atrocities committed by the Minneapolis Police Department since 2012. To get a quick sense of Rice's broader role in the DFL power structure, we can look at some of his political work in the last decade. This is by no means an exhaustive survey, as Rice has a deep network of elected officials and operatives. Rice worked as lawyer and advisor to Phyllis Khan, the 22-term state representative who was primaried by Ilhan Omar in 2016. Rice was a prominent supporter and strategist behind the career of Abdi Warsami, former 6th Ward City Council member and current head of the Minneapolis Public Housing Authority. Rice and Warsami worked to redistrict city council boundaries in Minneapolis in 2012. The result of Rice and Warsami's work on the redistricting committee was Ward 6 boundaries that consolidated a large Somali voting bloc. Warsami rode that voting bloc into the council seat in the following year. One of the stories I encountered from Rice's legend was that as a high school student advising a city council candidate, Michael Darris, he advised on an ethnic strategy, telling Darris he should get a Scandinavian ambassador for the Scandinavian section of his district to overcome any anti-Irish prejudice. Several articles I read pointed to Rice's passion for military history and the history of European ethnic and religious conflict. Rice pays close attention to relationships between ethnic and racial groups and the implication of those affiliations on campaigns, legislations, and local public policy. This should be kept in mind when reflecting on Rice's lucrative work with the Federation of the Police and collaboration with fascist operators in the Federation. Mr. Rice was at the center of controversy in the contentious 2015 primary race between longtime state rep Phyllis Khan and challenger Mohammed Noor for the 60B state Senate seat. Rice was working on the Phyllis Khan campaign, working hard to stave off a Noor challenge that was gaining momentum. It was in this race that the name Ilhan Omar started to circulate in the Twin Cities. Ilhan was at the time working on the mayoral campaign of Mark Andrews and holding DFL responsibilities carrying out some of the mechanics of the local election. Ilhan was also a Noor supporter in his attempt to primary Phyllis Khan. Ilhan was allegedly warned to stay away from the Cedar Riverside caucus by prominent supporter of Phyllis Khan, fellow Rice-backed city councilman Abdi Warsami. Ilhan did attend the caucus and did indeed end up in the hospital after she was assaulted when the caucus escalated when there was a contentious bid between campaigns over who would chair the meeting. Khan ended up winning that bitterly contested primary by a close margin. Even after victory, Brian Rice would go on to accuse the Noor campaign of election fraud through false registration of absentee Somali voters from supposedly outside the district. That accusation was then proven false by the Secretary of State's office. Ilhan, the campaign staff who was beaten up at the caucus, would go on to primary the 22-term Khan in the next election and then win Keith Ellison's seat in the U.S. Congress, becoming a leading figure in progressive politics. Back to Brian Rice. Mr. Rice has been listed among the most influential lobbyists in the state and has at times fielded criticism and cause of conflict of interest for his donations to many park board candidates, while also in a long-term contract with the park board worth more than $250,000 annually. When you look at Rice's body of work and his public life, it's clear that he's a calculating operator, familiar with the terrain and strategic about the choices he makes, keenly aware of where power is held and how power is yielded. It's important for us to understand that the extreme inequality, the racial disparities, and the police violence we are working to change are the results of the DFL project in Minnesota. Brian Rice is a product of and faithful soldier for the DFL machine. I don't mean for this to be understood in the cable news politics of Democrats versus Republicans. I want to be clear that the state-level GOP in Minnesota is a repressive, racist, violent organization like the GOP is across the country. But point to what we can see clearly in the local context is that both major parties are representatives of the capitalist class and the white power structure. And where they hold power, they will enact public policy that protects white wealth and represses any redistributive agenda. Mr. Rice found the racist violence of the police acceptable enough to protect them at the bargaining table and to fight for more protections for MPD officers at the state capitol. Mr. Rice wears a bow tie and is a respected member of the political class because the political class in Minnesota has relied upon police violence for repression of organizing in Black, Indigenous, queer, and working class communities for generations. In our local context, the DFL is the ruling class. This is the same DFL in which Amy Klobuchar rose to prominence. Through aggressive over-policing in Black and Native neighborhoods, her refusal to charge murderous police officers, including refusing to charge Derek Chauvin for a previous murder, through harsh austerity politics and repeated and known physical, mental, and emotional abuse of her campaign staff. When we went to the home of Brian Rice, we were signaling a rupture, affirming that we're experiencing a rupture in Minneapolis that we should embrace. The vision of a police-free future, of housing justice, of a thriving eco-socialist alternative to gentrification, a future of Black and brown power, of Indigenous sovereignty, a future where we end homelessness and improve our quality of life. We need political organizations that hold these visions, that are of and for these visions. We need to understand that the DFL is from a passing and oppressive era. In my research, I found that Brian Rice, as well as Jacob Frey, has hosted fundraisers with Minnesota GOP leaders and politicians. Again, the local context demonstrating that Democrats and Republicans collaborate to repress popular movement and consolidate corporate domination. While Rice was representing the flagrantly right-wing Federation for handsome profit, the firm was also making millions representing the DFL-dominated NPRB. And Rice, as an individual, was actively involved in DFL campaigns. The lesson from studying Brian Rice or Jim Michels is not that they are exceptionally or conspiratorially oppressive, but they are emblematic of a political class and a political order in Minnesota that relies on and participates in white supremacy, in violent repression. Bob Crow dons the uniform and plays the role of racist thug in public, but these men and women in suits, these men and women in high positions, are enforcing white supremacy with the same amount of passion and with the same impact. This is about political power. While Jacob Frey and Chief Arredondo are the visible face of power, a deeper layer of power exists. At union negotiating tables, arbitration hearings, ward redistricting, caucuses, and legislative breakfasts, it's this second face of power where we can and where we are contesting. We can build a movement that can demand we don't spend public money with law firms like Rice, Walther, and Mosley, or with lawyers like Jim Michels. We can put socialists, working class leaders in powerful positions like Brian Rice, where they can lobby and they can use their legal knowledge in the pursuit of redistribution and justice and racial justice. We can organize public pressure campaigns to effectively isolate and boycott firms like Rice, Walther, and Mosley, lawyers like Jim Michels. We can organize ourselves to let them know that safe harbor for police, advocating for murderous police, preventing accountability for white supremacists, that's enough to have you isolated from community, boycotted, and not allowed to project that type of repressive public power. I want to give a salute to everybody who over the years has called out the role of folks like Brian Rice in quietly supporting white supremacy and police terror. It's a good thing that the law firm restructured. Now it's time for us to learn more about Jim Michels and his practice and not let the contract negotiations and arbitration be done behind our back, but to put these things into the public light. And we need to also follow up on the fact that Brian Rice is still registered as a lobbyist for the Federation of Police. That's something for the park board to consider as his contract comes up in January. We need to root these people out, and we need to replace these bureaucrats and technocrats with committed community leaders, with working class socialists, with brown and black folks, with directly impacted folks. And we need to do that from the top to the bottom. And we really need to usher in this new era. And folks like Brian Rice are standing in the way, and it's time for them to step aside. Thanks for tuning in. Money, power, land, solidarity.